On March 7th, 2021, AEW held what will go down as one of the most anticipated wrestling events of the year. Of course, I'm talking about AEW Revolution 2021. The last few days leading up to this show were unlike anything I've seen for an AEW pay-per-view so far. Insane levels of hype and speculation followed this show to the very second it began. And while the show was a good one, but not one of AEW's best in my opinion, there was one single moment that had the entire wrestling world talking when the event was over. And you already know that I'm talking about the ending of the exploding barbed wire deathmatch between Jon Moxley and Kenny Omega. The ending was not a good one to say the least, especially because there was so much hype around this single match. And it's a shame because the match itself was pretty good in my opinion, but it's the ending that people are going to remember as long as we talk about this event. That ending being the botched explosion. And what more can be said about the botched explosion itself? It's been covered to death since it happened, so you don't really got to hear what I have to say about it. I thought it was awful, but what I'm going to talk about in this video is how AEW reacted when their backs were against the wall. AEW could have just easily said and admitted that they messed up and just keep on with the story as it was, but they chose to go in a much more interesting direction that overall added to the story. It wasn't a perfect save, but it was a pretty damn good one that deserves praise in my opinion. This is Tranquilo Club, and this is the adaptability of AEW. I've said it before in other videos, but I'll say it here again. AEW is not a perfect wrestling company. When they swing, they knock it out of the park more often than not. But they do have their fair share of misses every now and then. But when they do miss, they do one thing better than most other wrestling promotions can say, and that's adapt. In the world of American pro wrestling, nobody adapts as good as AEW does, and on the global scale, they're really only rivaled by New Japan in that department. I mean, just think about it. How many misfires have they had that they ended up fixing pretty quickly and pretty well? They've shown that if something isn't clicking or if there's a botch, that they're either willing to make it part of the story or adapt. And that's when the exploding barbed wire deathmatch comes in. The failed explosion at the end of this match was arguably AEW's biggest miss, and because of that, it ended up being their biggest test as far as adapting goes. After the ending of Revolution and everybody was done laughing at them, people were starting to wonder, okay, what is AEW gonna do to right themselves out of this one? And people were asking that question because they frankly had a lot going against them. It wasn't just the fact that the explosion itself was the weakest thing I've ever seen, it was also the fact that Eddie Kingston went into the ring to protect Jon Moxley from this explosion, and when it turned out to just be sparklers, Eddie Kingston sold it like death. So as soon as the show went off the air, AEW wasted no time reworking this story. In front of the fans in attendance, Jon Moxley would cut a promo after the show was over, basically laughing at Kenny Omega for making a shitty exploding ring. And that's where AEW instantly had an out. Because yes, in kayfabe, they had already explained that Kenny Omega was the one who built this ring. It was shown in a previous episode of Dynamite in the lead up to this pay-per-view. And Omega really leaned on the idea that he built this ring himself in the build up to this show, even going as far as posting this plan he drew up with crayons on social media, so they could really get away with saying the faulty ring was Omega's own doing. That's great, but then how do you explain Eddie Kingston selling it like death? Well, you let Eddie Kingston do what Eddie Kingston does best. You let him talk himself out of a situation. I can probably count on one hand the wrestlers who could have cut a promo to save this entire story, and Eddie Kingston is at the top of that list because Eddie is one of the best talkers in wrestling today. And as it goes, Eddie Kingston saved this entire story with a single promo on the following episode of AEW Dynamite, and he did it with a little help from his old friend, Jon Moxley. Kingston and Moxley, on the same page for the first time in years, would explain what happened at Revolution. Kingston explained that when he went to go save Jon Moxley from what he thought was going to be this massive explosion, he had a flashback to the last time he felt this level of high anxiety, and that was when he was in a jail cell waiting for court, where he was being told by guards that he would be sent to Rikers Island, which is described as being New York's most famous jail. In short, being in such a dangerous moment reminded Eddie Eddie of a traumatic moment in his life which resulted in him passing out. Very brilliantly said and very much in character for Eddie Kingston, something that only he could make believable. Jon Moxley only added to this explanation by saying that Impact paid for the bomb, which explained why it was so horrible. The chemistry between Jon Moxley and Eddie Kingston was a lifesaver for this story. These are two lifelong friends who have been through everything together in the wrestling business. And because we know that as fans, everything they do is believable. I mean, think back to their program back at Full Gear 2020. That program saw some of the most believable interactions between two characters in wrestling in recent memory. Everything they do feels real. It doesn't feel like they're playing characters, and that's why when they talk, you believe. And this explanation from Eddie Kingston only helped his face turn even more. It made him more sympathetic with the crowd. Kingston was already a fantastic three-dimensional character, but this only added another layer that developed his character even further. And that, my friends, is character development. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Characters in AEW go through changes. They grow, they react to the situations they're put through. And like any other well-written characters in any well-written show, that's why we connect to these wrestlers. Because we watch them grow and develop over time. And if you don't believe me, just look at how the crowd reacted to Eddie Kingston when he confronted Kenny Omega in the ring later that night. While Kenny and his posse were making fun of Eddie Kingston in front of his face, this made the audience root even harder for him. The Eddie chants were loud, louder than they've ever been. Eddie Kingston has always been a heel, but he always got a little crowd reaction, but this time he was being rooted for universally. It's fairly obvious now, but the audience wants one thing. They want Eddie Kingston to kick Kenny Omega's ass. And that's because AEW chose to adapt in such a crucial moment. I'm sure if things went as planned, Eddie would still be getting massively over as a babyface. But because he had to show some type of vulnerability that was very much still in character for him, AEW might have just unintentionally made Eddie Kingston an even bigger babyface than originally planned.